Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comment section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Lawrence Sigmund Bittaker was born on September 27, 1940, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His biological mother did not want a child, so she left him at an orphanage shortly after his birth. He was adopted as an infant by a couple who gave him their last name. His adoptive father had a job in the airplane industry. This job required the family to move to many different places across the United States throughout Lawrence's childhood. He never lived in one city for a very long time. From a young age, Lawrence had problems with behavior and the law. When he was just 12 years old, he was arrested for shoplifting. This was his first arrest. Over the next 4 years, he was arrested several more times for the same crime and for other small thefts. Because of these arrests, he became known to the juvenile court system. Lawrence would later say that he stole things because he felt his adoptive parents did not love him or pay attention to him. He said stealing made him feel important. Lawrence was a smart boy. Tests showed he had a high IQ. However, he found school to be boring and uninteresting. He did not like to study or pay attention in class. In 1957, when he was a teenager, he decided to quit high school. By this time, his family had moved to the state of California. Less than a year after leaving school, Lawrence was in trouble again. He was arrested for stealing a car. He was also arrested for hitting another car with the stolen vehicle and driving away, and for trying to escape from the police. For these crimes, he was sent to the California Youth Authority, which is a prison system for young offenders. He stayed there until he turned 18 years old. When Lawrence was released from the youth prison, he found out that his adoptive parents had cut all ties with him. They had moved to a different state and did not tell him where they went. They wanted nothing more to do with him. Lawrence never saw or spoke to his adoptive parents again. Now alone as a young adult, Lawrence quickly returned to crime. Only a few days after his release, he was arrested again. This time, he was caught driving a stolen car across state lines. In August 1959, he was sentenced to serve 18 months in a federal reformatory prison in Oklahoma. He was later moved to a medical prison in Missouri to finish his sentence. He was released in 1960. He did not stay out of trouble for long. Within months, he was arrested in Los Angeles for robbery. In May 1961, he was given a 15-year prison sentence for this robbery. While he was in prison, a psychiatrist examined him. The doctor said Lawrence was very good at manipulating or controlling other people. The doctor also said Lawrence had a lot of hidden anger inside him. Lawrence was let out on parole in 1963 after serving only 2 years of his 15-year sentence. Parole means he was released under supervision. In October 1964, he violated the rules of his parole and was sent back to prison. In 1966, 2 different psychiatrists examined him. Both doctors said he was a borderline psychopath. This meant he was a person who could manipulate others easily and could not understand or care about the consequences of his actions. Lawrence told one doctor that committing crimes made him feel important. But he also said his difficult childhood and environment made it hard for him to stop breaking the law. He was given medicine for his mental state. He was released from prison again in 1967. His freedom was short. Just 1 month after his release in July 1967, he was arrested again. He was convicted of theft and for leaving the scene of a car accident. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but was let out in April 1970. In March 1971, he was arrested for burglary. Because he kept breaking his parole rules, a judge sentenced him in October 1971 to a prison term that could last anywhere from 6 months to 15 years. He was released again in 1974. In 1974, Lawrence committed a violent act. He was in a supermarket and stole a steak. A young employee of the store saw him steal it. The employee, named Gary Louie, followed Lawrence out to the parking lot. The employee asked Lawrence if he had forgotten to pay for the meat. In response, Lawrence stabbed the young man in the chest with a knife. The knife just missed the employee's heart. Lawrence tried to run away, but 2 other store workers caught him and held him for the police. Gary Louie survived the attack. Lawrence was convicted of assault with a deadly weapon, which is a less serious charge than attempted murder. For this crime, he was sent to the California Men's Colony, a prison in San Luis Obispo. While Lawrence Bittaker was imprisoned at the California Men's Colony, he met another inmate named Roy Norris. Norris had been sent to prison for rape. The 2 men became friendly. They discovered they shared a strong hatred for women and a common interest in sexual violence. Norris told Bittaker that seeing fear in young women's faces was his biggest thrill. Bittaker told Norris that if he ever raped a woman, he would kill her afterward, so there would be no witness to identify him. When they were alone, the 2 men began to talk about their fantasies. They spoke about kidnapping, raping, and killing teenage girls after they were released from prison. This idea grew into a detailed plan. They decided that once they were free, they would find and murder 1 girl from each teenage age, from 13 to 19 years old. They promised to find each other after their release and carry out this plan. Bittaker was released from prison on October 15, 1978. He moved to Los Angeles and got a job as a machinist, which paid him well. He rented a room in a motel in Burbank. To people in his neighborhood, he seemed friendly and generous. He was known to give money to charity and buy food for homeless people. He made a special effort to be popular with local teenagers. He kept beer and marijuana in his motel room so that teenagers would come to visit him and see him as a cool, friendly adult. Roy Norris was released from prison on January 15, 1979. He moved into his mother's home in Redondo Beach. Very soon after his release, he raped a woman and left her in a desert area. He found a job as an electrician. Shortly after getting out, Norris received a letter from Bittaker. In late February, the 2 men met at a hotel. They talked about their old plan from prison and agreed to start doing it for real. The men knew they needed a specific type of vehicle to kidnap girls. They decided a windowless van would be best because it was private and they could easily pull someone inside. With money from Norris, Bittaker bought a used silver gray 1977 GMC van. It had a large sliding door on the passenger side. Bittaker later said that when he saw that door, he knew he could drive very close to a girl, slide the door open, and pull her inside without much trouble. The men called their van Murder Mac. Before committing any murders, they decided to practice. From February to June of 1979, Bittaker and Norris drove around and picked up more than 20 different female hitchhikers. They did not harm these girls. The purpose was to test their methods for luring girls into the van and to find quiet, remote locations where they could later take victims without being seen. During one of these drives, they found a locked fire road in the San Gabriel Mountains. Bittaker used a crowbar to break the lock on the gate. He then put his own lock on the gate so that they and only they could access this remote road. Their first murder happened on June 24, 1979. The victim was a 16-year-old girl named Lucinda Lynn Schaefer. That day, Bittaker and Norris were driving near the beach, drinking and looking for a target. Norris saw Schaefer walking down a street and pointed her out. They first tried to get her to come into the van by offering her marijuana and a ride. When she said no, they drove ahead, parked, and waited. Norris got out and stood by the sliding door. When Schaefer walked past, Norris spoke to her briefly, then suddenly grabbed her, pulled her into the van, and closed the door. Bittaker turned the van's radio up very loud to cover any sounds. While Bittaker drove, Norris tied Schaefer's hands and feet and covered her mouth with duct tape. They drove her to the isolated fire road in the mountains. There, both men took turns raping her. After the assaults, Schaefer asked if they were going to kill her. Norris said no. But then the two men argued about whether to let her go or kill her. Schaefer begged for a moment to pray if they were going to kill her. Norris tried to strangle her with his hands, but stopped. Then Bittaker strangled her until she collapsed. He then took a wire coat hanger, twisted it around her neck with a pair of pliers, and tightened it until she died. They wrapped her body in a plastic shower curtain and threw it over the side of a steep canyon. Their second murder was on July 8, 1979. The victim was 18-year-old Andrea Joy Hall, who was hitchhiking. Another car picked her up first, but Bittaker and Norris followed that car until Hall got out in Redondo Beach. This time, Norris hid in the back of the van behind a blanket, so it looked like Bittaker was alone. Bittaker offered Hall a ride, and she accepted. Once she was inside, he offered her a cold drink from a cooler in the back. When Hall went to get the drink, Norris jumped out from his hiding place. After a struggle, he overpowered her, taped her mouth, and tied her up. They took her to the mountains. Both men raped her there. Bittaker also took Polaroid pictures of her while she was naked and terrified. Later, Bittaker took Hall up a hill alone. He later told Norris that he told Hall he was going to kill her and asked her to give him reasons why she should live. Then he killed her by driving an ice pick into her ear and into her brain. He turned her over and did the same to her other ear. He then strangled her and threw her body off a cliff. Their third and fourth murders happened together on September 3, 1979. The victims were 15-year-old Jackie Doris Gilliam and 13-year-old Jacqueline Leah Lamp. The two girls were sitting at a bus stop. Bittaker and Norris pulled over and offered them a ride, which they accepted. Inside the van, Norris offered the girls marijuana. Soon, the girls realized the van was not going the right way, and they became scared. When Lamp tried to open the van door to escape, Norris hit her on the head with a bag full of heavy lead weights, knocking her out. The men then overpowered Gilliam, tied up both girls, and taped their mouths. They drove the girls to the mountains and kept them captive in the van for almost 2 days. During this time, both men repeatedly raped and physically abused them. Bittaker tortured Gilliam with an ice pick and a pair of vice grip pliers. He also made an audio tape recording of himself raping Gilliam. After 2 days, Bittaker killed Gilliam by stabbing an ice pick into each of her ears and then strangling her. He then forced Lamp out of the van. Norris hit Lamp in the head with a sledgehammer. When she was still alive, Bittaker strangled her to death. They threw both bodies down an embankment. Their fifth and final murder was on October 31, 1979. The victim was 16-year-old Shirley Lynette Ledford. She was hitchhiking home from a Halloween party. Bittaker and Norris pulled over and offered her a ride. She may have accepted because she recognized Bittaker from a McDonald's where she worked. Once she was in the van, Norris pulled a knife, and they tied her up with heavy tape. What followed was an extended period of torture. Bittaker moved to the back of the van with Ledford while Norris drove. Bittaker beat her, raped her, and tortured her with tools like a hammer and pliers. He recorded much of this on an audio tape. Norris also took part in the torture, hitting Ledford's elbow repeatedly with a sledgehammer after she begged him not to. After hours of abuse, Norris killed Ledford by strangling her with a wire coat hanger tightened with pliers. Instead of hiding the body, they decided to leave it in a public place to create shock. They drove to a residential neighborhood in Sunland and placed Ledford's body on the front lawn of a random house. She was found the next morning by a jogger. During this time, other people noticed things but did not yet connect them to these crimes. For example, a neighbor teenager said Bittaker had shown her a disturbing photo and played a tape of girls screaming. Also in late September, the men had abducted and raped another woman named Robin Robeck, but had let her go. She reported the rape to police, but they could not find the attackers at that time. The crimes from June to October remained undiscovered by the police. In November 1979, Roy Norris contacted a friend named Joseph Jackson. Norris had known Jackson from their time together in prison. Norris began to confide in Jackson about the crimes he and Bittaker had committed. He gave graphic details about the murder of Shirley Lynette Ledford, whose body had been found. He also confessed to 4 other murders and several abductions and rapes. Jackson was disturbed by what he heard. He went to his own lawyer for advice. The lawyer told Jackson he should go to the police. Jackson agreed, and he and his lawyer contacted the Los Angeles Police Department. The LAPD then directed them to the Hermosa Beach Police, as some crimes occurred in that area. A Hermosa Beach detective named Paul Bynum was assigned to the case. He listened to Jackson's information. Detective Bynum checked files of missing persons and unsolved crimes. He saw that the details Norris described matched reports of several missing teenage girls from that summer. Also, Norris had described an abduction and rape from September 30th. This matched a report filed by a young woman named Robin Robeck. She said 2 men had sprayed her with mace, forced her into a van, raped her, and then let her go. The police had not found the attackers at that time. Detective Bynum sent an investigator to Oregon, where Robeck was then living, to show her photo lineups. Robeck immediately identified pictures of Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris as the men who had attacked her. With this identification, the police had a solid reason to arrest the 2 men. They first put Norris under surveillance. They watched him and saw him selling marijuana. On November 20th, 1979, the police arrested Norris for violating his parole by dealing drugs. On the same day, other officers went to Bittaker's motel room in Burbank and arrested him for the rape of Robin Robeck. Both men were now in custody. The police then searched Bittaker's motel room and his van. In the van, they found a sledgehammer, a bag of lead weights, and a tape recorder with a cassette inside. They played the cassette. It was a recording of a girl screaming, crying, and begging for mercy while being assaulted. The police also found Polaroid photographs of teenage girls. Some of these pictures showed Andrea Hall and Jackie Gilliam, who had been reported missing. In Norris's apartment, police found a bracelet that was later identified as belonging to Shirley Ledford. Both men's homes contained hundreds of Polaroid photos of young women, taken mostly at beaches without their knowledge. The police contacted the family of Shirley Ledford. They played a portion of the audio tape for Ledford's mother. She identified the voice of the girl screaming as her daughter. Voices of the men on the tape were identified as Bittaker and Norris. This was a major piece of evidence. Faced with this evidence, Roy Norris decided to cooperate with the police. On November 30th, he agreed to talk to Detective Bynum and a deputy district attorney named Stephen Kay. At first, Norris denied everything. But when they showed him the evidence, he began to confess. He described all 5 murders, the rapes, and how they were done. He told them where they had disposed of the bodies in the San Gabriel Mountains. He tried to make it seem like Bittaker was the main planner and the more violent of the 2. In return for his full confession and his promise to testify against Bittaker, the prosecution offered Norris a plea deal. They would not seek the death penalty or life without parole for him. In early 1980, Norris led police to the areas in the mountains where they had left the bodies. The skeletons of Jackie Gilliam and Jacqueline Lamp were found. An ice pick was still stuck in Gilliam's skull. The bodies of Lucinda Schaefer and Andrea Hall were never found. On March 18, 1980, Norris pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree murder, and other charges like rape and robbery. On May 7th, he was sentenced to 45 years to life in prison. This meant he could be eligible for parole someday. Lawrence Bittaker's trial began on January 19, 1981. The main witness against him was Roy Norris. Norris testified in detail about their plan, the abductions, the rapes, and the murders. He told the court that Bittaker was the one who enjoyed the torture and killing. Other witnesses also testified. A teenage neighbor of Bittaker's said he had shown her a Polaroid of one victim and played a tape of screaming girls for her. A man who shared a jail cell with Bittaker after his arrest said Bittaker had bragged about torturing the girls with ice picks and pliers. The most powerful evidence at the trial was the audio tape of Shirley Ledford's torture. The prosecutor, Stephen Kay, warned the jury it would be disturbing. When the 17-minute tape was played in the courtroom, many people wept. Some had to leave the room. On the recording, Ledford could be heard screaming, pleading, and begging for her life while Bittaker mocked her and beat her. Throughout the playing of the tape, Bittaker sat at the defense table smiling. Bittaker chose to testify in his own defense. He claimed he was not involved in the murders. He said he had paid some of the girls for sex and for posing in photos. He claimed Norris was the real killer and had acted alone after Bittaker left. He even said the tape of Ledford was just an act, that she had agreed to scream for the recording. The jury did not believe his story. The jury found Lawrence Bittaker guilty on all counts. 5 charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, rape, and other crimes. Next, the jury had to decide his punishment. The prosecution asked for the death penalty. After a very short deliberation, the jury agreed. Bittaker was sentenced to death. The judge also gave him an additional sentence of 199 years and 4 months in case the death sentence was ever overturned. Bittaker appealed his sentence many times over the years. All of his appeals were rejected. He was placed on death row at San Quentin prison. He never expressed real remorse. He filed many pointless lawsuits about minor issues like the quality of prison food. Roy Norris was sent to a different prison. He was denied parole multiple times. Lawrence Bittaker died in his prison cell on December 13, 2019. He was 79 years old. The cause was natural. Roy Norris died in prison on February 24, 2020, at the age of 72, also from natural causes. Neither man was executed by the state. Both died of illness while incarcerated. The audio tape of Shirley Ledford's murder remains with the FBI, where it is used to train agents about the realities of violent crime. The 2 men responsible for these crimes spent the rest of their lives in prison until their deaths. Story 2. Philip Carl Jablonski was born on January 3, 1946. His childhood was not happy. His father was an alcoholic. This means he drank too much alcohol very often. When he drank, he became violent. He would beat Philip's mother. He also beat Philip and his other children. The father also sexually abused his family. This means he did inappropriate and hurtful physical things to his wife and children. Philip grew up in this environment of fear and violence. As a teenager, Philip went to high school. It was during this time that he met a young woman named Alice McGowan. They began a relationship. After high school, in 1966, Philip decided to join the United States Army. The Army sent him overseas to fight in the Vietnam War. This was a major war happening at that time in Vietnam. Philip returned from the war in 1968. When he came back to the United States, he and Alice McGowan got married. They moved to the state of Texas to live together. It was during this period that Philip began to show very violent sexual behavior. During sex with his wife Alice, he would put a pillow over her face. He would try to suffocate her, which means to stop her from breathing. On other occasions, he would use his hands to strangle her. He would squeeze her neck until she lost consciousness. This means she would pass out. Alice was very afraid, but she did not report this to the police at first. The violence continued, and eventually, Alice McGowan left Philip. She ended the marriage because she was afraid for her life. After Alice left, Philip met another woman named Jane Sanders in November 1968. Their relationship started with violence. On their very first date, Philip forced Jane to have sex against her will. This is called rape. Jane did not tell the police about this rape. Jane Sanders became pregnant with Philip's child. After Philip finished his service in the Army, they moved together to the state of California in July 1969. The violence against Jane continued. One time, they were having sex and Jane wanted to stop. Philip took out a gun. He pointed it at her and said he would shoot her if she did not continue. He also hit her on the head with the hard handle of the gun. The hit was so hard that Jane passed out. When she woke up, Philip was raping her. Jane finally left Philip in 1972. In late 1972, Philip attacked another woman. This woman was someone he knew. He went to her home. He had a knife. He used the knife to threaten her and then raped her. While this happened, the woman's baby was in the same room. The woman managed to escape and ran to a neighbor's house. The neighbor called the police. The police came and arrested Philip. He was put on trial for the crime of rape. The court found him guilty. This was his first official criminal conviction. After his release from prison for the 1972 rape, Philip Jablonski moved to Palm Springs, California. In February 1977, he met a woman named Linda Kimball. They began a relationship, and by August of that year, they were living together in an apartment. In December 1977, Linda Kimball gave birth to their daughter. The relationship had problems. On the evening of July 6, 1978, Jablonski went to the home of Linda's mother, Isabel Pauls, who lived nearby. He woke her up. He told her he had come to her house to rape her. But he said he changed his mind. He said when he looked at her face, all he could see was Linda's face. Isabel Pauls was able to escape from her own house and run to a neighbor for help. She was scared, but she did not call the police to report what happened. A few days after this incident, Linda Kimball decided to leave Jablonski. She took their baby daughter and moved in with her mother for safety. On the morning of July 16, 1978, Linda Kimball returned to the apartment she had shared with Jablonski. She went there to pick up more belongings for their baby. Later that afternoon, she was found dead inside that apartment. She had been violently attacked. She was beaten, stabbed with a knife, and strangled. Philip Jablonski was arrested by the police for this crime 11 days later. He was put on trial, found guilty of murder, and sent to prison. He served 12 years in prison for killing Linda Kimball. He was released on parole in 1990. Parole means he was let out of prison early for good behavior, but he had to follow certain rules. While he was in prison, a woman named Carol Spadoni read a newspaper advertisement he had placed. She began writing to him. They married in 1982, while he was still serving his sentence. After his release in 1990, Jablonski went to live with Carol Spadoni and her mother, Eva Peterson, in their home in Burlingame, California. Jablonski was required to attend a community college as a condition of his parole. He did this. On April 23, 1991, Carol Spadoni and her mother Eva Peterson were killed in their home. Carol Spadoni, who was 46 years old, was shot. Then duct tape was placed over her mouth and nose to suffocate her. After that, she was stabbed. Her 72-year-old mother, Eva Peterson, was also shot. She was then sexually assaulted. The day before that, on April 22, 1991, a woman named Fatima Van was killed. She was 38 years old. She was a student at the same community college Jablonski attended. She was a widow and had 2 teenage daughters. Her body was found in a shallow ditch in the desert near Indio, California. She had been shot in the head. She had also been sexually assaulted. After her death, her body was mutilated. Her eyes and ears were cut off. The words, "I love Jesus," were carved into the skin on her back. After these killings, Jablonski left California. He drove east. On April 25, 1991, he stopped at a rest area in Uintah County, Wyoming. There, he approached a woman named Yvette Shelby. He showed her a gun. Yvette Shelby was very frightened, but when Jablonski dropped the gun, she saw her chance. She ran to her car and drove away quickly. She drove to the next truck stop and called the police. The police found Jablonski and questioned him about the incident. Jablonski told the police officer that the gun had accidentally fallen out of his car. The police officer believed his explanation and let him go. Jablonski continued driving. On April 27, 1991, he stopped at a store along Interstate 70 in Grand County, Utah. The store was owned by a married couple, Margie Rogers and her husband. Jablonski robbed the store. He then took Margie Rogers, who was 58 years old, and killed her. She was sexually assaulted and shot twice in the head. Her body was found at the store. On April 28, 1991, a police officer in Kansas conducted a routine traffic stop. The officer stopped a car for a minor traffic violation. The driver of the car was Philip Jablonski. The officer asked to see Jablonski's license and registration. During the stop, the officer became suspicious. The officer saw a gun in the car. The officer then checked the car's license plate number through the police computer. The computer alert showed that the car was possibly connected to serious crimes in California. The officer arrested Jablonski at the traffic stop for having the gun. After the arrest, detectives from California were contacted. They began to link Jablonski to the recent murders. Ballistics tests were done on the gun found in his car. Ballistics is the study of bullets and guns. These tests proved that the bullets used to kill Carol Spadoni, Eva Peterson, and Fatima Van came from Jablonski's gun. Police also gathered physical evidence from the crime scenes, including fingerprints and hairs. These matched Jablonski. Jablonski was extradited from Kansas back to California to face charges. Extradition is the formal process of moving a suspect from one state to another to stand trial. He was charged with the murders of Carol Spadoni, Eva Peterson, and Fatima Van. He was also charged with the murder of Margie Rogers in Utah. Utah authorities worked with California, so he could be tried for that crime as well. The investigation showed how he selected some victims. Fatima Van was a classmate at his community college. Margie Rogers was a victim of opportunity during his drive. The attack on Yvette Shelby in Wyoming was used as further evidence of his pattern of violence against women. The case went to trial in California. In court, the prosecutors presented all the physical evidence. They showed the ballistics reports linking his gun to the murders. They showed the fingerprint and hair matches. They also called witnesses, including Yvette Shelby from Wyoming and Isabel Pauls, the mother of his first murder victim. Jablonski was found guilty on all counts for the California murders. A separate legal process was held for the murder of Margie Rogers in Utah. He was also found guilty of that crime because he had killed multiple people, and because the murders were especially violent, the prosecutors sought the death penalty. The judge sentenced Philip Jablonski to death for his crimes. He was sent to San Quentin State Prison in California to live on death row. Death row is a special section of a prison for inmates waiting for execution. Jablonski appealed his sentence many times over the years. An appeal is a legal request for a higher court to review the case. In January 2006, the California Supreme Court reviewed his case and agreed with the original verdict. They upheld his death sentence, meaning his execution was still scheduled. Philip Jablonski never faced execution by the state. On December 27, 2019, prison guards found him dead in his cell at San Quentin. He was 73 years old. A prison spokesperson said he died of unknown causes, meaning the exact medical reason was not immediately released. His death ended the legal case against him. For the victims' families, the long legal process was over. The families of Linda Kimball, Carol Spadoni, Eva Peterson, Fatima Van, and Margie Rogers had seen the person responsible convicted and sentenced, though he died of natural causes before his execution could be carried out. Philip Jablonski died in prison, his crimes resolved by the justice system. Story 3. Michael Bruce Ross was born on July 26, 1959, in Putnam, Connecticut. He was the oldest child of Dan Ross and Patricia Ross. The family lived on a chicken farm in the small town of Brooklyn, Connecticut. Michael had 3 younger siblings, 2 sisters and a brother. Life on the farm was difficult. Michael's father, Dan, worked very hard to keep the farm running. Michael's mother, Patricia, had serious problems with her mental health. She was often unstable and unpredictable. She was sometimes violent and would hit her children. There were times when she had to stay in a hospital for treatment. She also left the family alone for periods of time. When Michael was 6 years old, a traumatic event happened in the family. A teenage uncle who lived with them died by suicide. Later, some family members and friends would suggest that this uncle had sexually abused Michael before his death. This was never confirmed, but it was talked about by people who knew the family. As Michael grew up, he began to show troubling behavior himself. When he was 12 years old, he sexually molested 2 younger girls who were neighbors. This behavior was discovered. In response, Michael's father decided to punish him. His mother would tell his father when Michael did something wrong, and his father would carry out the punishment. For molesting the girls, Michael's father beat him. Despite the problems at home, Michael did very well in school. He was a highly intelligent student. He read a lot of books and earned good grades. He did not have many friends and was often alone. He finished his studies at Killingly High School in 1977. Because of his high grades and test scores, Michael was accepted into Cornell University, a very good school in New York. He moved there to study economics in the fall of 1977. This was a big change from the small farm in Connecticut. At university, he was known as a quiet and smart student who kept to himself. He worked hard on his studies. During his time at college, Michael began to have strong and disturbing urges. He started to follow women around campus, watching them without their knowledge. This is called stalking. He did this to satisfy his sexual compulsions. He felt he could not control these urges. He did not tell anyone about these feelings or actions. He continued to do well in his classes, hiding this other part of his life. He graduated from Cornell University with a degree in economics in May of 1981. After graduation, he moved back to Connecticut. He got a job as an insurance salesman. He lived a quiet, normal-looking life on the outside, but his inner urges and thoughts were becoming harder for him to manage. After graduating from Cornell University in 1981, Michael Ross began his job as an insurance salesman in Connecticut. He drove a company car for his work. The job required him to travel long distances on rural roads to meet clients. During these drives, his violent urges grew stronger. He began to actively plan how to act on them. His first murder happened soon after his graduation. In May 1981, he was in Ithaca, New York, near his old university. He saw a 25-year-old Cornell student named Zung Nak Tuesday. He followed her and then attacked her. He raped her and then strangled her to death. He placed her body in a creek near the university. The police found her body, but thought she had died by suicide. Ross drove back to Connecticut afterward. He felt a temporary relief from his urges after the killing. This relief did not last. By early 1982, the urges returned. On January 5th, he was driving in Brooklyn, Connecticut. He saw a 17-year-old girl named Tammy Williams walking alone. He stopped his car and offered her a ride. She got into the car. He then drove to a secluded area. He raped her and then strangled her with his hands. He left her body in the woods. She was found later by police. Ross now knew he could use his job as cover. His travels put him in contact with potential victims. On April 2nd, 1982, he was driving from New York to Connecticut. He saw a 16-year-old girl named Paula Pereira hitchhiking. He picked her up. He drove to a remote spot near Interstate 84. He assaulted her and strangled her. He left her body there. It was found 18 days later. The method was always similar. He would look for young women who were alone, often near roads. He would use his car to trap them. He would use physical force to control them. He would then rape them and kill them by strangulation. He never used a gun or a knife. His hands were his weapon. On June 15, 1982, he saw a 23-year-old woman named Deborah Smith Taylor. Her car had run out of gas on a rural road. She was walking alone to find help. Ross stopped and offered help. Instead, he forced her into his car. He drove to a very isolated location. He raped her and strangled her. He left her body in a heavily wooded area. Her remains were not found for 4 months. Ross continued his normal life. He worked his sales job. He lived quietly. No one suspected him, but he kept killing. On November 19, 1983, he was in Norwich, Connecticut. He saw a 19-year-old woman named Robin Dawn Stavinsky who was hitchhiking. He picked her up. He drove to the grounds of the old Norwich State Hospital. He assaulted her and strangled her in the woods there. Her body was discovered a week later. His crimes became more brazen. On April 22, 1984, he was in Griswold, Connecticut. He saw 2 14-year-old girls, April Bernays and Leslie Shelley, walking home together. He forced both girls into his car at the same time. He drove them to a remote area called Beach Pond, which is in Rhode Island. He sexually assaulted April Bernays. He then strangled both girls. He put their bodies in the trunk of his car. He later dumped them in a water culvert in Preston, Connecticut. He committed his last murder on June 13, 1984. He was again in Griswold, Connecticut. He saw a 17-year-old girl named Wendy Barabalt walking along the road. He forced her into his car. He drove to a field. He assaulted her and strangled her. He left her body in that field. This time, however, there were witnesses. People saw a man matching Ross's description talking to Wendy. They also saw a car that looked like his company car. The police were called. They now had a description of a suspect and a car. The witness descriptions from Wendy Barabalt's murder gave the Connecticut State Police a specific lead. They were looking for a white man with glasses, driving a silver or gray company car. An investigator checked the records of local businesses that used such vehicles. The list included the insurance company where Michael Ross worked. When police learned that Ross's sales territory covered all the areas where the murders had happened, he became a key suspect. Police brought Michael Ross in for questioning on June 21, 1984. They asked him about his whereabouts on the days of the murders. His answers were vague and his story had inconsistencies. The police obtained a search warrant for his car. Forensic experts found small, matched fibers in the trunk of his car. These fibers were chemically identical to the unique polyester used in the sweaters that April Bernays and Leslie Shelley were wearing when they were killed. They also found hairs that matched the victims. Confronted with this physical evidence, Ross first denied everything. After many hours of interrogation, he began to confess. He started by admitting to the murders of April Bernays and Leslie Shelley. Over the following days, he provided detailed confessions for the murders of Wendy Barabalt, Robin Stavinsky, Tammy Williams, and Deborah Smith Taylor. He also confessed to the killing of Paula Pereira in New York and Zung Nak Tu in Ithaca. He told the police where he had left the bodies and how he had committed each crime. His confession matched evidence that only the killer would know. Michael Ross was formally arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder and sexual assault. Because he confessed and the physical evidence was strong, his lawyers advised him to plead guilty to avoid a long trial. In 1987, he pleaded guilty to 4 of the murders in Connecticut. The judge, G. Sarsfield Ford, sentenced him to death. In a separate case in New York in 2001, he pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of Paula Pereira and received an additional prison sentence. Ross was placed on Connecticut's death row. For many years, he and his lawyers filed appeals to try to stop his execution. The families of the victims had to wait through this long legal process. Then, in 2004, Ross suddenly decided to stop all appeals. He said he wanted to accept his execution to give the victims' families peace and end their suffering. His own father and a lawyer argued that Ross was not mentally competent to make this choice, citing a condition called death row syndrome from his long isolation. Courts held hearings to decide if Ross was mentally sound. Several psychiatrists evaluated him. The courts ultimately decided he was competent and could choose to stop his appeals. The state of Connecticut scheduled his execution for May 13, 2005. On that day, he was taken to the execution chamber at Osborne Correctional Institution. He was given a lethal injection, a series of chemicals that stopped the heart and breathing. He was pronounced dead at 2:25 in the morning. He was the first person executed in Connecticut in 45 years. After the execution, a psychiatrist who had argued Ross was incompetent received a letter Ross had mailed before dying. It read, "Check and mate. You never had a chance." This suggested Ross had manipulated the final proceedings. The execution had a lasting effect on the state. In 2012, Connecticut abolished the death penalty for future crimes. In 2015, the state commuted the sentences of all remaining inmates on death row to life in prison without parole. Michael Bruce Ross remained the last person ever executed by the state of Connecticut. Story 4. Robert Lee Yates Jr. was born on May 27, 1952, in the small town of Oak Harbor, Washington. He was raised there in what was considered a middle-class family. His family regularly attended a local Seventh-day Adventist church. A fact about his family history was known to them. In 1945, his grandmother had killed his grandfather with an axe. This was an event from the past that the family was aware of. Yates attended Oak Harbor High School and graduated in the year 1970. After finishing school, he did not immediately go to college. He took on various jobs. In 1975, he got a job with the Washington State Department of Corrections. He worked as a correctional officer at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. This job meant he was responsible for guarding prisoners inside the state prison. In October of 1977, Yates decided to enlist in the United States Army. He left his job at the prison. In the Army, he learned to fly aircraft. He became certified to fly both transport airplanes and helicopters. His military career sent him to live in different countries. He was stationed in Germany for a time. In the 1990s, he was also sent to Somalia and Haiti as part of United Nations peacekeeping missions. He received several medals for his service, including the Army Master Aviator Badge. Yates left active duty in the Army in April 1996. He had served for nearly 19 years. The military was reducing its size at that time, so he was allowed to retire with full benefits, even though he was slightly short of the usual 20-year requirement. About a year later, in April 1997, he joined the Army National Guard. He served as a helicopter pilot there. This meant he was a part-time soldier while living a civilian life at home. In his personal life, Yates married a woman named Linda in 1976. Together, they had 5 children. Their children were born between 1974 and 1989, so they had 4 daughters and 1 son. From the outside, Yates appeared to be a family man and a respected military veteran. He lived in the Spokane, Washington area during his time in the National Guard. To his neighbors and acquaintances, he seemed normal. He maintained his job as a pilot and took care of his family. While Robert Yates lived an outwardly normal family life and served in the National Guard, he was also committing violent crimes over many years. His crimes began long before he moved to Spokane. His first known murders happened in 1975 when he was still working as a correctional officer in Walla Walla. On July 13th of that year, two college students, Patrick Oliver and Susan Savage, went for a picnic and a swim. They were shot and killed. Their bodies were found the next day. There was no clear connection to Yates at the time, and the case remained unsolved for decades. After this, there was a long period where no murders were clearly linked to him. He joined the military and moved around. The next linked crime happened in 1988. On July 7th, Stacy Hahn, who was involved in sex work, was last seen in Seattle. Yates later confessed that he picked her up in his van. Her partial skeleton was found months later near Big Lake. The murders became more frequent in the 1990s after Yates was living in the Spokane area. His method was consistent. He would drive along East Sprague Avenue, an area known for sex work and drug use. He would approach women who were prostitutes. He often used drugs with them. He would negotiate for sex and have them get into his vehicle, which was often a Ford van. After the sexual act, he would shoot them. He used a small .25 caliber handgun, a Raven model. He shot them in the head or the heart. He would then drive the body to a remote, rural area on the outskirts of the city or county. He dumped the bodies in fields, wooded areas, or ditches. Starting in late 1997, he began placing plastic grocery bags over the heads of his victims after shooting them. He did this to some victims, but not all. He killed Shannon Zielinski in May 1996. Her body was found in June near a school bus stop. In August 1997, he killed Heather Hernandez and Jennifer Joseph within days of each other. Their bodies were found in fields in Spokane. Jennifer Joseph was only 16. Police found a brown towel and a brown hair at her scene, but it did not lead to a suspect. In the fall of 1997, he killed several more women. Darla Scott was killed around late September or early October. Her body was found in a shallow grave in November. Shawn Johnson was killed in October. Her body was found in December. Lori Wason was killed in early November. Sonny Oster was killed around November 1st. Linda Mabin was killed in late November. Their bodies were all discovered in various remote locations around Spokane weeks or months later. In December 1997, Yates also committed murders near Tacoma, Washington. He killed Melinda Mercer on December 6th. He shot her multiple times and placed 4 plastic bags over her head. He later stated that she chewed through 2 of the bags before she died. Her body was found the next day. On December 18th, he killed Sean McClenahan in Spokane. Her body, along with Lori Wason's, was found on December 26th in a gully. Both had plastic bags over their heads. The killings continued into 1998. He killed Michelin Durning on July 4th. Her body was found 3 days later. He killed Connie Ellis in Tacoma on September 17th. Her body was found in October. She also had plastic bags over her head. One woman, Christine Smith, survived an attack on August 1st, 1998. Yates had shot her in the head during a sexual encounter, but the bullet did not kill her. She was hurt and robbed. She went to the police to report an assault and robbery. She described the man in detail. She said he was about 50 years old, a National Guard helicopter pilot, and had 5 children. She described his van very accurately. She did not know she had been shot. Doctors later found bullet fragments in her hair. Her report was filed, but it did not immediately lead to Yates. During this time, police in Spokane were aware a serial killer was targeting women. They formed a task force. They began collecting DNA samples from certain men they considered possible suspects. On September 19, 1998, police stopped Robert Yates and asked him for a voluntary DNA sample. He refused. He told them he was a family man and that such a request was too extreme. The police did not have enough evidence to force him to give a sample at that time. The task force investigating the murders of women in Spokane focused their efforts on the 1997 killing of Jennifer Joseph. They had physical evidence from her scene. During their investigation, they learned that a white Chevrolet Corvette was possibly involved. They began looking for a white Corvette that might be connected to the crimes. Police later discovered that a man had been stopped by officers in a white 1977 Corvette for a minor traffic issue months earlier. The report from that stop was filed, but the officer had handwritten the car model. The word Corvette was misread as Camaro by other investigators. Because of this reading error, the importance of that traffic stop was missed for a long time. The man driving that Corvette was Robert Yates. In early 2000, the task force correctly identified the car as a Corvette and linked it to Yates. They now considered him a strong suspect in Jennifer Joseph's murder. On April 18, 2000, they arrested Yates at his home. They charged him with the murder of Jennifer Joseph. After the arrest, the police got a search warrant for the white Corvette, which Yates had sold but was later found. Forensic experts searched the car carefully. They found small traces of blood inside. This blood was tested for DNA. The DNA from the blood matched Jennifer Joseph's DNA. This was solid proof that she had been in Yates's car. The police also collected DNA from Yates himself from a saliva sample. They compared his DNA to evidence from other crime scenes. The DNA results showed a match. Robert Yates's DNA was linked to biological evidence found on or near the bodies of 12 other women who had been murdered. This DNA evidence connected him to a total of 13 murders in the Spokane area. Christine Smith, the surviving victim, saw Yates's picture in the news after his arrest. She contacted the police and identified him as the man who had attacked and shot her in 1998. Faced with this overwhelming evidence, Yates's lawyers began to negotiate a plea agreement with prosecutors. To avoid receiving the death penalty for the 13 Spokane County murders, Yates agreed to confess to them. In 2000, he pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder for attacking Christine Smith. As part of the deal, he told investigators where he had left the bodies and how he had committed the crimes. He was sentenced to 408 years in prison for these crimes. However, he had also committed murders in other Washington counties. Because his plea deal was only for Spokane County, he could still be tried elsewhere. In 2001, he was charged in Pierce County for the murders of Melinda Mercer and Connie Ellis. For these 2 murders, the prosecutor decided to seek the death penalty. A separate trial was held in Pierce County in 2002. Yates was found guilty of both murders. Since this was a death penalty case, the jury then had to decide his sentence. The jury decided on the death penalty. The judge agreed and formally sentenced Yates to death by lethal injection in October 2002. Yates and his lawyers appealed the death sentence for many years. They argued it was unfair because he had already received a life sentence for the other 13 murders. The appeals process continued. In 2018, the Washington State Supreme Court made a ruling on the death penalty. The court ruled that the death penalty law in the state was unconstitutional. This meant it could no longer be applied. Because of this ruling, the death sentence for Robert Yates was changed. It was commuted, or changed, to a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. All of his appeals were finally over. Robert Yates was sent to the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, the same prison where he once worked as a guard. He will spend the rest of his life in prison with no chance of ever being released. The families of the victims received some finality from the confessions and the life sentence, though the pain of their loss remained. Robert Lee Yates Jr., the man who lived a double life as a family man, soldier, and serial killer, will die in prison. Story 5. Raymond Leslie Morris was born on August 13, 1929, in the industrial town of Walsall, Staffordshire, England. He was an only child. His father worked as a leather worker, which was a common trade in Walsall, a town known for manufacturing leather goods. His mother took care of the home. The family lived in a typical working-class area. Morris attended a local school. He was known to be a bright boy with a higher-than-average intelligence. He did not stand out as a troublemaker during his early school years. He left school at the age when it was standard to do so and began to work. His first jobs were manual labor, fitting for the area's industries. In 1951, when he was 22 years old, Morris married his first wife, Muriel. She was the daughter of a neighbor and was 2 years younger than him. The couple set up home together and later had 2 sons. To people outside the home, Morris appeared to be a normal, hard-working husband and father. He held down steady jobs, often in sales or engineering roles. However, within the home, his behavior was different. His wife later described him as a man with a very strong sex drive who needed to be in control. She said he demanded obedience and would become cold and angry if she did not immediately comply with his demands, which often involved sex. This need for dominance and control was a feature of their private life, but was hidden from public view. After 10 years of marriage, the relationship ended. Morris's first wife left him, primarily because of his controlling and sometimes violent behavior. They divorced in 1963. The court ordered Morris to pay regular child support for his 2 sons. After the divorce, he sometimes tried to use these payments to pressure his former wife into having sex with him, threatening to withhold the money if she refused. Following his divorce, Morris continued to live in Walsall. He was polite and well-spoken in his professional life, earning respect at work. He progressed in his career, moving from sales to a position as a foreman at a precision instruments factory. To his colleagues and neighbors, he was a private man but not unfriendly. He was known to be helpful and was considered a reliable employee. He lived alone for a period after his divorce. This was the established pattern of his life, outwardly normal and respectable, but with a documented history of controlling behavior and a need for sexual dominance within his marriage, which ultimately led to its breakdown. His life continued in this manner, with his work and private routines, in the town where he had always lived. After his divorce, Raymond Morris continued his life in Walsall. He worked at his job and maintained a routine. In 1964, he married for a second time. His new wife was a 21-year-old woman named Carol Horsley. The couple moved into a well-furnished flat in a tall building on Green Lane in Walsall. This flat was directly opposite the local police station. On the evening of December 2nd, 1964, a 9-year-old girl named Julia Taylor was in Bloxwich, an area near Walsall. A man driving a blue Vauxhall Velox car approached her. The man told Julia he was a friend of her mother. He said her mother had asked him, whom he called Uncle Len, to drive Julia to her aunt's house to collect Christmas presents. Julia believed him and got into the car. The man did not drive to the aunt's house. Instead, he drove to a remote area near some old mining slag heaps. There, he sexually assaulted the young girl. He then used his hands to strangle her. Believing she was dead, he threw her, half-naked, into a water-filled ditch and drove away. Julia was seriously injured. About 50 minutes later, a man riding his bicycle in the rain heard weak crying. He found Julia in the ditch. He stopped a passing van, and they took her to a hospital. She survived, but she was very traumatized and could remember few details about her attacker or the car. On the afternoon of September 8, 1965, a 6-year-old girl named Margaret Reynolds was walking back to her school in Aston, Birmingham, after going home for lunch. She was last seen by her older sister when they parted ways to go to their different schools. Margaret never arrived at her school. Her parents reported her missing. Police began a huge search. They questioned thousands of people and searched houses and land for miles around. No trace of Margaret was found. 3 months later, on the afternoon of December 30th, 1965, a 5-year-old girl named Diana Tiff disappeared. She was walking from her grandmother's house to her own home in Blakenall Heath, Walsall. She was carrying a pink plastic handbag. A family member thought they saw her walk past a laundrette, but she never reached home. Her parents reported her missing in the evening. Again, a massive search began, involving police and hundreds of local people. No sign of Diana was found. On January 12, 1966, a man who was hunting rabbits on a large area of countryside called Cannock Chase found a body. The body was that of Diana Tiff. She was hidden in undergrowth near a ditch. A medical examination showed she had been raped and then suffocated. Police searching the same spot then found another body just inches away. It was the badly decomposed body of Margaret Reynolds. Very little of her clothing was found. Police could not determine exactly how she died, but it was clear she had been murdered. The police now knew they were looking for someone who killed young girls. They believed the person who attacked Julia Taylor in 1964 was the same man. The police created a major investigation. They worked very long hours, collecting information on thousands of cars and people. They had a strong feeling the killer would try to take another child. A senior detective made a plan. The plan was that if another child was reported missing, they would immediately set up roadblocks on all major and minor roads in the area within 20 minutes. They would also seal off the paths into Cannock Chase. They gave this plan a code name, Stop Plan. The plan was tested on August 19, 1967. That afternoon, a 7-year-old girl named Christine Darby was playing with 2 friends on Camden Street in the Comma area of Walsall. A man in a gray car stopped and asked the children for directions to a place called Comma Green. The children pointed the way, saying it was very close. The man pretended to be confused. He asked Christine if she would get in the car and show him the way, promising to bring her straight back. Christine got into the car. The man then reversed the car and drove off at high speed in the opposite direction, towards Cannock Chase. Christine's friends ran to tell her mother. Her mother immediately ran to a telephone and called the police. The police activated the stop plan. Roadblocks were set up around Walsall. Unfortunately, the car with Christine had already left the area. A huge search of Cannock Chase began, involving hundreds of police officers and soldiers. On August 22nd, a soldier searching a wooded plantation found Christine Darby's body. She was naked from the waist down. A medical examination showed she had been raped and suffocated. Her body was found about a mile from where the other 2 girls had been discovered. Police now had more information. 2 witnesses had seen a gray car, likely an Austin Cambridge or Morris Oxford model, parked near where Christine's body was found. One witness saw a man standing by the car. With the help of these witnesses, the police made a color picture, called an identikit, of the suspect's face. This was the first color identikit used in a British manhunt. Thousands of copies were printed and put in newspapers. The police began the enormous task of finding and checking every gray Austin car of that model in the Midlands. They checked thousands of cars and interviewed their owners. The manhunt continued for over a year, but the killer was not found. On November 4th, 1968, a 10-year-old girl named Margaret Alton was playing near some waste ground in Walsall. A man in a green Ford Corsair car with a cream roof called her over. He said he had some fireworks on the passenger seat for her. When Margaret went to the car, she saw the seat was covered with newspaper and there were no fireworks. She hesitated. The man then grabbed her and tried to pull her into the car. Margaret struggled. At that moment, the man saw a young woman come out of a shop across the street. He let go, quickly got into his car, and drove away. Margaret ran home. The young woman from the shop had seen the car and remembered part of its license plate number. The young woman who saw the attempted abduction of Margaret Alton was able to give the police a partial license plate number. Police checked their records. They found a car that matched the description, a green Ford Corsair with a cream roof and a similar plate number. This car was registered to Raymond Morris, who lived in the flat opposite the police station. Morris was arrested for questioning about the attempted abduction the next morning. During this interview, Morris told the police he had only owned the Ford Corsair for a short time. He said his previous car had been a gray Austin A55. This information was very important to detectives from the Cannock Chase murder investigation team. A gray Austin A55 was the type of car wanted in the murder of Christine Darby. Morris also looked very much like the color identikit picture of the suspect from 1967. The detectives checked their old files. They found that Morris had been interviewed several times during the earlier murder investigations. Each time, his wife had told police that Morris was with her at the time of the crimes. Because of this alibi, his file had been marked with words meaning no further action. Now, the police looked more closely. They checked Morris's past car ownership records. They discovered that at the time of the attack on Julia Taylor in 1964, Morris had owned a blue Vauxhall Velox, which matched the description of the car used in that crime. On November 15, 1968, Morris was arrested again, this time for the murder of Christine Darby. His wife, Carol, was also taken to a police station for questioning. At first, she repeated her old story, but after several hours, she changed her statement. She told the police she had lied to protect her husband. She said on the day Christine Darby was taken, Morris did not come home until nearly 5 p.m., not at 2 p.m. as she had previously said. Her parents confirmed this new timing. The police also searched Morris's flat. They found a collection of homemade photographs. The photographs showed a young girl naked. The girl was later identified as Morris's 5-year-old niece. The pictures had been taken inside the flat. In some photos, a man's hand and wristwatch were visible. Morris had a distinctive watch and scars on his hands that matched those in the photographs. An important witness from the Cannock Chase murder investigation was brought to see Morris. This witness, Victor Whitehouse, was the man who had seen a stranger near the murder site in 1967. Whitehouse immediately identified Morris as the man he had seen that day. Morris was formally charged with the murder of Christine Darby. He was also charged with the attempted abduction of Margaret Alton and with indecently assaulting his niece. His trial began at Stafford Assizes on February 10, 1969. He pleaded not guilty to murder and attempted abduction, but guilty to the charges involving his niece. At the trial, the prosecution presented the evidence. Victor Whitehouse and another witness, Gene Rawlings, both pointed to Morris in the courtroom as the man they saw on Cannock Chase. Morris's wife, Carol, testified for the prosecution. She told the court she had given her husband a false alibi because she did not believe he could have done such a thing. She confirmed he came home late on the day of the murder. Morris's employer produced time records showing Morris had finished work early enough on the day of the murder to have committed the crime. This contradicted Morris's own story. Morris chose to testify in his own defense. He denied all the charges. He claimed his wife was lying and that the police had beaten him. He said the photos of his niece were an accident and that he was disgusted with himself. The jury did not believe him. After hearing all the evidence, they deliberated for less than 2 hours. They found Raymond Morris guilty of the attempted abduction of Margaret Alton and the rape and murder of Christine Darby. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment. As he was led away, people in the public gallery shouted angry threats at him. After the trial, police stated they were certain Morris was also responsible for the murders of Margaret Reynolds and Diana Tift, and for the attack on Julia Taylor. However, there was not enough evidence to charge him with those crimes. The main investigation was closed. Raymond Morris remained in prison for the rest of his life. He never admitted his guilt for any of the crimes and never showed remorse. He made several attempts to appeal his conviction, but all were rejected. He died of natural causes in his prison cell on March 11, 2014, at the age of 84, having spent 45 years behind bars. Story 6. Colin Ireland was born in England in March 1954. His mother was 17 years old and not married. His father left immediately after Colin was born. His father's name was not on the birth certificate. Colin never knew his father. Colin's mother was very poor. Because of this, they moved to many different homes and places. When Colin's mother married a new man and became pregnant, she could not look after Colin. She put him into the care system, which means he lived with foster carers or in a children's home. After some time, he returned to live with his mother. His mother married a different man in 1966. During the 1960s, the family lived in a town called Sheerness. When Colin was a boy, 3 different older men made sexual advances towards him. On another occasion, a man spied on him. These men were pedophiles. Colin left school for good when he was only 13 years old. He did not get a proper education. As a teenager, Colin started committing crimes. When he was 16, he was sent to a borstal for theft. A borstal was a type of prison for young people. While he was there, he set fire to another boy's belongings on purpose. At age 17, he was convicted of robbery. He escaped from custody, but was soon caught and sent back to borstal. As a young adult, Colin tried to work. He had several manual jobs, like laboring, but he did not keep them for long. In December 1975, he was convicted of stealing a car, damaging property, and burglary. For these crimes, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. He was released in November 1976. After his release, he moved to Swindon. He lived for a few months with a woman and her children. In 1977, he was convicted of extortion, which is forcing someone to give you money through threats. He received another 18-month prison sentence. In 1980, he was convicted of robbery again and sentenced to 2 years in prison. In 1981, he was convicted of attempted deception, which is trying to trick someone. In 1982, Colin Ireland married a woman named Virginia Zammit. They lived in London and had a daughter together. In 1985, he was convicted of going equipped to cheat, which means having tools to commit fraud. He got a 6-month sentence. His wife discovered he had been unfaithful to her. They divorced in 1987. In 1989, Colin married another woman named Janet Young in Devon. He was violent towards her and stole money from her. They separated in the early 1990s. After the separation, Janet and her children became homeless. Colin moved to Southend-on-Sea. He had no home and lived in a hostel for a while. Later, he got his own small flat in Southend. He was unemployed and had little money. Living in Southend and needing money, Colin Ireland began taking trains to London. He started visiting a pub in Earl's Court called the Colehun Arms. This pub was known as a meeting place for gay men, particularly those interested in sadomasochism, or S&M. Colin was heterosexual, but he pretended to be a gay man interested in S&M to meet potential victims. He chose this method because he believed these men would be easier to trick and overpower. Colin planned his crimes carefully. Before each trip to London, he packed a murder kit. This kit included rope, handcuffs, a change of clothes, and other items. His plan was to meet a man, go back to the man's home, suggest tying him up as part of a sexual game, and then rob and kill him. His first victim was Peter Walker, a 45-year-old choreographer, on March 8, 1993. Colin met him at the Colehun and went to Walker's flat in Battersea. Inside, Colin suggested tying Walker up. Walker agreed, believing it was part of a consensual activity. Once Walker was restrained, Colin suffocated him by placing a plastic bag over his head. After killing Walker, Colin performed a strange act. He placed 2 teddy bears in a sexual position on the body. He then locked Walker's 2 dogs in a separate room. Colin cleaned the entire flat to remove any fingerprints or other evidence. He stayed in the flat until morning because he thought leaving in the middle of the night would look suspicious. The next day, Colin was angry that the murder was not on the news. He wanted fame. He called a charity helpline and then a reporter at the Sun newspaper. He told them he had killed a man and that the man's dogs were locked in a room. He said he wanted to be known as a serial killer. His second victim was Christopher Dunn, a 37-year-old librarian, on May 28, 1993. Colin met him at the same pub and went to Dunn's flat in Wealdstone. He used the same method. He tied Dunn up and then killed him. Colin cleaned the scene and left. The police found Dunn's body but thought his death was a tragic accident during a sexual game. Because this murder happened in a different police district and the method seemed different, the police did not connect it to Peter Walker's murder. Colin wanted more attention and money. His third victim was Perry Bradley III, a 35-year-old American businessman, on June 4, 1993. At Bradley's flat in Kensington, Colin again suggested tying him up. Bradley was hesitant. Colin lied and said he could only become sexually aroused if bondage was involved. Bradley reluctantly agreed. Once Bradley was tied face down on the bed with a rope around his neck, Colin revealed his true intent. He demanded Bradley's bank card PIN number, threatening to torture him if he refused. Bradley gave him the PIN. Colin later used the card to take £200 from a cash machine. He also took £100 in cash from the flat. Colin told Bradley to go to sleep. After Bradley fell asleep, Colin decided he could not leave a witness who could identify him. He used the rope around Bradley's neck to strangle him. Before leaving, he placed a doll on the body. Colin was furious that even after 3 murders, he was not a famous name in the newspapers. He decided to kill again very quickly. Just 3 days later, on June 7, 1993, he met Andrew Collier, a 33-year-old housing warden at the pub. They went to Collier's flat in Dalston. When a noise happened outside, both men went to the window. Colin gripped a metal bar on the window. Later, he would forget to wipe this bar clean. Afterward, Colin tied Collier to the bed and demanded his PIN. Collier refused. To frighten him, Colin killed Collier's cat. When Collier still refused, Colin strangled him with a rope. He then committed a bizarre act. He put a condom on Collier's body and placed the dead cat's mouth on it. He put the cat's tail in Collier's mouth. While searching the flat for money, Colin found medicine that showed Collier was HIV positive. This made Colin angry. He only found £70. Before leaving the next morning, Colin called the police from a payphone. He asked why they had not linked the 4 murders yet. Colin's fifth and final victim was Emmanuel Spiteri, a 41-year-old chef, on June 12, 1993. He met Spiteri at the Colehun, and they took a train to Spiteri's home. Colin followed the same pattern of tying him up and demanding his PIN. Spiteri would not give it. Colin strangled him. After his usual cleanup, Colin did something new. He set a small fire in the flat before leaving, hoping to destroy evidence. The fire did not spread much. Later, he called the police, told them to look for a body at a fire address, and hinted he might stop killing. The police investigation into the 5 murders began to connect the cases. After the death of Andrew Collier, officers found a clear fingerprint on the metal bar across his window. This print was not from Collier. They entered it into the National Fingerprint Database. Meanwhile, after Emmanuel Spiteri's murder, police checked security camera footage from Charing Cross train station. The footage showed Spiteri walking with a tall, shaven-headed man on the night he died. The police released this image to the public, asking for help to identify the man. Colin Ireland saw his own image in the newspaper. He decided to contact the police, but he planned to lie. He walked into a police station and said he was the man in the photograph with Spiteri. He claimed he had met Spiteri at the pub and gone to his flat, but then left Spiteri there with another man. The police took his statement, but were suspicious. They then checked his fingerprints against the one found in Andrew Collier's flat. They matched. With this physical evidence, Colin Ireland was arrested for the murders of Andrew Collier and Emmanuel Spiteri. While he was in prison waiting for trial, he chose to confess. He spoke to detectives and admitted to killing Peter Walker, Christopher Dunn, and Perry Bradley III as well. He explained his methods in detail. He said he had no special hatred for gay men, but targeted them because he found it easy to gain their trust and get into their homes. He said he robbed them because he was unemployed and needed money for train tickets and living expenses. The case went to the Central Criminal Court, known as the Old Bailey, in December 1993. Colin Ireland pleaded guilty to all 5 murders. The judge, Mr. Justice Sachs, sentenced him to life imprisonment for each killing. The judge stated that Colin was an exceptionally frightening and dangerous man, and that taking 5 lives was carnage. The judge recommended that Colin should never be released from prison. Colin Ireland was sent to Wakefield Prison, a high-security facility. In December 2006, the government confirmed he was one of a small group of prisoners serving a whole-life tariff, meaning he would die in jail. In prison, he was questioned about other unsolved murders of gay men, but no further convictions were ever made. Colin Ireland died in his prison cell on February 21, 2012, at the age of 57. A preliminary investigation found his death was from natural causes, specifically a lung disease and complications from a hip fracture he had suffered earlier that month. His death brought a final end to the case that had terrified London's gay community in the spring of 1993. He remained in prison until his death, never granted freedom. Story 7. Willie James Hodges was born on June 19, 1960, in the state of Alabama. He grew up in a rural area where his family lived. His family was poor. They did not have a lot of money for food, clothes, or other things. His father left the family when Willie was a young boy. After his father left, his mother had to raise the children alone. She worked long hours at different jobs to earn money. Because she was working so much, she was often not at home. Willie and his siblings were left by themselves for many hours each day. Willie went to the local schools. He did not do well in his classes. He had trouble reading and understanding the lessons. Other children sometimes made fun of him because he was quiet and struggled with schoolwork. He stopped trying to learn and often skipped school. He never finished high school. As a teenager, Willie started getting into trouble. He would take small things from stores without paying. He took tools from people's garages and sold them for a little money. The police were called to his home a few times. He was given warnings, but was not sent to jail for these early small crimes. When he became a young man, Willie moved around often. He did not have a steady job. He worked for a short time at a car wash. He also worked for a few weeks on a construction site, carrying materials. He usually lost these jobs because he would not arrive on time or would miss days without telling anyone. He did not have many friends. People who knew him said he was very quiet. He would often just watch people and not talk. He sometimes stayed with different relatives for a few months at a time. He would help them with chores, and they would let him sleep in their home. But these arrangements never lasted long. After a while, A relative would ask him to leave because he did not contribute money for food or because he was not helpful. In his 20s, Willie joined the military. He thought it would give him a better life. However, he was discharged after less than 2 years. The military said he could not follow the rules and routines properly. After leaving the military, Willie moved more frequently between different states. He spent time in Alabama, Ohio, and Florida. He lived in cheap motel rooms or slept in his car when he had one. He continued to take small jobs that did not last. He also continued to steal things when he needed money, targeting places that seemed easy to break into. By his 40s, Willie James Hodges had no permanent home, no lasting relationships, and no real career. He was a man who moved from place to place, living on the edges of society, mostly unnoticed. Willie James Hodges continued to live a life of moving and stealing. By late 2001, he was in Sumter County, Alabama. On November 26, 2001, he needed money. He saw a home that looked isolated. This was the home of 66-year-old Winnie Johnson. Hodges broke into her house, likely through a window or unlocked door. He intended to steal items he could sell. Winnie Johnson was inside her home. Hodges was not expecting anyone to be there. When she discovered him, he had a gun. He shot Winnie Johnson, causing her death. He then quickly took some items from her home and left. The crime was discovered later. Police began an investigation, but had no strong leads. Less than a month later, on December 19, 2001, Hodges was in Pensacola, Florida. He was staying with a cousin's family. His cousin lived next door to a 58-year-old woman named Patricia Bellinger. Hodges had helped a relative fix a truck near Bellinger's home, so he knew the area. On that day, he saw Bellinger's house and believed it was empty. He broke a window to get inside. Once inside, he began to search for valuables. However, Patricia Bellinger was home. She encountered Hodges in her house. Hodges did not run away. He picked up a claw hammer that was in the house. He used the hammer to hit Patricia Bellinger on the head many times. After beating her, he went to the kitchen. He took a steak knife. He stabbed her once in the neck with the knife. This stab wound killed her. After the attack, Hodges continued to search the house for money and jewelry. He took some items. He then left through the same window he had broken. At that exact moment, 2 of Patricia Bellinger's relatives arrived at the house. They had come to pick her up for a holiday trip. They saw Hodges climbing out of the window. They got a good look at his face and his clothes. The relatives immediately went inside and found Patricia Bellinger's body. They called the police. The police arrived very quickly. They used dogs and a helicopter to try to track the killer. The neighbors were told to stay inside. The community was scared because this was a violent crime in a quiet area. The next day, the police released a drawing of the killer's face based on the relative's description. They also described the clothes he was wearing. Despite this, no one was arrested for the crime at that time. Over a year later, on March 19, 2003, Hodges was in Cincinnati, Ohio. An 81-year-old woman named Laverne Jansen had gone to a local store to buy a lottery ticket. Hodges saw her there. He followed her back to her apartment building. Laverne Jansen entered her apartment. Hodges then went to her door and knocked on it. When she opened the door, he forced his way inside. A neighbor across the hall was home. This neighbor heard noise and looked through the peephole in her own door. She saw a man forcing his way into Laverne Jansen's apartment. The neighbor immediately called the police. She told them what she was seeing. However, it took the police 16 minutes to arrive at the apartment building. When the police finally arrived and entered the apartment, they found Laverne Jansen. She had been beaten and raped. She was dead. The killer was gone. The police searched the area but could not find him. 10 days later, the Cincinnati police asked the public for help finding a person seen at the same store. This did not lead to an arrest. On September 5, 2005, Willie James Hodges was arrested in Pensacola, Florida. He was not arrested for murder. He was arrested for trying to break into 2 different homes. Because he was a previously convicted felon, the law required him to give a DNA sample. The police took a swab from inside his cheek. This DNA sample was entered into a national computer system called CODIS, which stores DNA from criminals and crime scenes. Around the same time, detectives in Pensacola who worked on old, unsolved cases were reviewing the file for Patricia Bellinger's murder. They looked at all the evidence again. They found a photograph at the crime scene that they had not identified before. They discovered the person in the photograph was a man named Vankish Golden. Vankish Golden was in prison. The detectives went to the prison to talk to him. Vankish Golden was Willie Hodges' cousin. Golden told the detectives that in December 2001, Hodges had been staying with his family. Golden confirmed that his family lived next door to Patricia Bellinger. He also said Hodges had helped a relative fix a truck in the neighborhood around that time. This placed Hodges directly at the location of the murder. The detectives now focused on Hodges. They got a copy of his fingerprints from his arrest for the attempted burglaries. They compared these fingerprints to fingerprints found on the broken window at Patricia Bellinger's house. The fingerprints matched perfectly. Next, the police searched Hodges' personal belongings from when he was arrested. They found an old, blood-stained receipt from a store. Laboratory tests showed the blood on this receipt matched the blood found on a sock left inside Bellinger's home. Finally, they checked the DNA sample Hodges had given after his arrest. This DNA matched the DNA collected from the crime scene at Patricia Bellinger's house. With this evidence, Hodges was formally charged with the murder of Patricia Bellinger. He told the police he was innocent. He said he had only gone into Bellinger's home to close her windows because he thought she was away and had forgotten to close them. The police and prosecutors did not believe this story because of the strong physical evidence. After Hodges was charged in Florida, police detectives from Alabama and Ohio learned about his arrest. They saw the details of the Bellinger case. The methods used in the Bellinger murder were similar to the unsolved murders of Winnie Johnson in Alabama and Laverne Jansen in Ohio. Both were older women who were attacked in their own homes during break-ins. The detectives from Alabama and Ohio filed charges against Hodges for these murders as well. However, it was decided that Hodges would first go to trial in Florida, where the death penalty was a possibility. Willie Hodges' trial for the murder of Patricia Bellinger began in February 2008. Doctors evaluated Hodges and said he had a low IQ. His lawyers argued he was not fully capable. However, the judge ruled that Hodges understood the difference between right and wrong and was therefore sane enough to stand trial. During the trial, the prosecutors showed the jury the DNA evidence, the fingerprint match, the blood-stained receipt, and the testimony from his cousin. The evidence was very strong. The jury quickly found Willie James Hodges guilty of first-degree murder and burglary. In February 2009, the judge followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Hodges to death by lethal injection. He was sent to death row in a Florida prison. Years later, in 2016, a ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court in a case called Hurst v. Florida changed the rules for death sentences in the state. Hodges' lawyers used this ruling to appeal his sentence. They argued that his original death sentence was not legal because the jury's vote for death was not unanimous. In 2017, a court agreed. His death sentence was overturned. He was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Willie James Hodges remained in prison at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Lake City, Florida. The charges against him in Alabama and Ohio for the murders of Winnie Johnson and Laverne Jansen were never brought to trial. He died in prison on March 21, 2024, from natural causes, while still serving his life sentence. Story 8. George Joseph Smith was born on January 11, 1872, in Bethnal Green, a poor area of London, England. His father sold insurance for a living. From a very young age, George was difficult. He did not listen to authority and often got into trouble. Because of his bad behavior, when he was just 9 years old, he was sent to a reformatory school in Gravesend, Kent. This was a strict institution for boys who committed minor crimes or were uncontrollable. When he became a teenager and a young man, Smith's troubles with the law continued. He was arrested and imprisoned several times. His crimes were usually related to theft and fraud. Fraud is the crime of getting money from people by tricking them. In 1896, he was sentenced to 12 months in prison. His crime was convincing a woman to steal from the people who employed her. Smith then used this stolen money to open a bakery shop in the city of Leicester. In 1898, Smith began using false names. He used the alias George Oliver Love. Under this fake name, he legally married a woman named Caroline Beatrice Thornhill in Leicester. This was his first and only legal marriage. After the wedding, the couple moved to London. Caroline found work as a live-in maid for several wealthy families. While working, she would steal money and valuables from her employers and give them to Smith. This plan worked for a short time. However, Caroline Thornhill was eventually caught stealing in the town of Worthing. She was sentenced to 12 months in prison. When she was released from jail, she was angry with Smith. She went to the police and told them about his role in the crimes. Because of her statement, Smith was arrested. In January 1901, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison for receiving stolen goods. After Smith was released from prison in about 1903, his wife Caroline Thornhill had had enough. She left England completely and moved to Canada to get away from him. Smith was now alone and had no legitimate job. He returned to a life of drifting from place to place and looking for ways to make easy money. Smith discovered that he could easily marry women, take their money, and then leave them. He began to do this regularly. In June 1908, in Worthing, he met a widow named Florence Wilson. He married her, even though he was still legally married to Caroline Thornhill. This made the new marriage a crime called bigamy. Shortly after the wedding, Smith took £30 from Florence Wilson's savings account. He also sold all her furniture from their London apartment. Then he simply left her. Only 1 month later, in July 1908, Smith was in Bristol. He placed an advertisement in a newspaper for a housekeeper. A woman named Edith Peglar replied to the ad. Smith married her very quickly, which was another act of bigamy. However, he did not completely abandon Edith Peglar. He would often leave her for months at a time. He told her he was traveling to other cities to buy and sell antiques. He would always return to her, usually with money that he had taken from other women. This pattern became his life. In October 1909, using the name George Rose Smith, he married a woman named Sarah Freeman. After getting married, he took all her savings. He also sold her war bonds, which were like savings certificates. He took a total of £400 from her. Then he disappeared. He did the same thing to other women, including Bessie Mundy and Alice Burnham. In September 1914, he married a woman named Alice Reed using yet another fake name, Charles Oliver James. In total, between 1908 and 1914, George Smith entered into 7 fake, bigamous marriages. His method was always similar. He would find a woman, often one who had some savings or property. He would marry her quickly. Then he would take control of her money, sell her possessions, and disappear. He would then return to Edith Peglar for a while before finding his next target. After marrying Bessie Mundy in 1910, George Smith discovered she had a trust fund. This was money held for her by others. He could not access it easily. Because of this, he abandoned her in 1910. He did not see her again for 2 years. In 1912, by pure chance, Smith saw Bessie Mundy walking on the seafront in Weston-super-Mare. He approached her and pretended to be happy to see her. He convinced her to take him back. He suggested they go on a holiday together to the seaside town of Herne Bay. In Herne Bay, they rented a house at 80 High Street. This house did not have a bathtub. After they moved in, Smith waited for 7 weeks. Then he went out and rented a bathtub for the house. Soon after the bathtub was delivered, Smith took Bessie to see a local doctor named Frank French. Smith told the doctor that Bessie was having bad headaches and fits. The doctor examined her and said she just had headaches. He gave her some medicine. Smith argued with the doctor. He insisted Bessie's fits were epileptic seizures. The doctor did not agree. On July 12, 1912, Smith went to Dr. French's house very early in the morning. He told the doctor his wife was having a very bad fit. Dr. French came to their house and saw Bessie in bed. She said she was feeling better. The doctor gave her a calming injection and said he would return later that afternoon. However, the next morning, Smith went to get the doctor again. He said she's gone. He told the doctor his wife had another fit in the bath and had drowned. Dr. French went to the house and found Bessie Mundy in the rented bathtub. Her head was underwater. Her legs were straight out, and her feet were sticking out of the water. The doctor saw no signs of a fight or struggle. He believed Smith's story about an epileptic fit. He concluded she had a seizure and drowned accidentally. A few days before her death, Smith had made Bessie write a will leaving all her money to him. After the inquest ruled her death an accident, Smith received all her money, which totaled £2,579. In 1913, Smith, now using his real name, married Alice Burnham. Alice was a nurse who had saved her own money. Shortly after their marriage, Smith made Alice take out a life insurance policy. This policy would pay £500 to him if she died. He also made her write a will leaving everything to him. In December 1913, they went to the seaside town of Blackpool. They moved into a boarding house. Smith specifically asked to see the bathroom and inspect the bathtub before they rented the room. On December 12, 1913, Smith sent a telegram to Alice's father. It said Alice was very sick. The next day, he sent another telegram. This one said, "Alice died last night." The landlady of the boarding house found Alice's body in the bathtub. Smith told the police he had gone out to buy some fish for dinner. He said when he returned, he found his wife dead in the bath. He said she must have fainted because of the hot water. The inquest again ruled the death an accidental drowning. Smith collected the £500 from the life insurance policy. In December 1914, Smith, now using the name John Lloyd, married Margaret Lofty. She was a 38-year-old governess. On the day of their wedding, he took her to a lawyer's office. He made her write a will leaving everything to her new husband, John Lloyd. After that, he took her to an insurance office. He made her take out a life insurance policy for £700, with him as the beneficiary. Later that same day, he took her to their new rented rooms in Highgate, London. The landlady showed them the bathroom. That evening, the landlady heard the sound of splashing water from the bathroom. Then she heard someone playing hymns on the harmonium in the sitting room. Smith was playing the music. A short time later, Smith knocked on the landlady's door. He said, "I am afraid my wife is dead." He said he had found her in the bath. The landlady saw Margaret Lloyd's body in the bathtub. The bath was still 3/4 full of water. Smith explained that his wife must have fainted and slipped under the water. The police were called, but they saw no signs of violence. The death did not seem suspicious to them at the time. After each of these deaths, Smith behaved in the same way. He quickly collected the money from the wills and insurance policies. He then left the town immediately. He showed little emotion. He efficiently handled the funeral arrangements as cheaply as possible before leaving. He would then return to his bigamous wife, Edith Peglar, for a short time, or would move on to find another woman. In early January 1915, the Metropolitan Police in London received a letter. The letter was written by a boarding house owner named Joseph Crossley from Blackpool. He wrote on behalf of himself, his wife, and a man named Charles Burnham. Charles Burnham was the father of Alice Burnham, who had died in Blackpool in 1913. They had seen a newspaper report about the recent death of a Margaret Lloyd in her bathtub in London. They thought the details were very similar to Alice's death. They sent the newspaper clipping about Margaret Lloyd and another clipping about Alice's inquest to the police. They asked the police to investigate. The case was given to Divisional Detective Inspector Arthur Neal. He first went to the house in Highgate where Margaret Lloyd had died. He saw the bathtub. It was very small. He found it hard to believe a healthy woman could accidentally drown in it. He then spoke to the coroner, Dr. Bates. The coroner confirmed there were no real signs of a struggle on Margaret Lloyd's body, only a small bruise on her elbow. Inspector Neal then discovered two important facts. First, on the very day she died, Margaret Lloyd had made a will leaving everything to her new husband, John Lloyd. Second, on that same day, she had taken out a large life insurance policy for £700, also in his favor. Inspector Neal then contacted the police in Blackpool. He learned about the death of Alice Smith, formerly Burnham. He found out that her husband, George Smith, had also taken out life insurance on her and had made her write a will for him. He also learned Smith had specifically checked the bathtub at the boarding house before renting the room. The similarities were clear. Neal now believed John Lloyd and George Smith were the same man. He suspected this man had murdered both women for their money. Neal decided to set a trap. He knew the insurance company was about to pay out the £700 for Margaret Lloyd's policy. He asked Dr. Bates to delay, but then send a letter saying the money was ready. Neal believed the suspect would contact the lawyer who held the will to get his money. Police officers watched the lawyer's office. On February 1, 1915, a man matching the description of John Lloyd arrived. Inspector Neal approached him. He asked the man if he was John Lloyd. The man said yes. Neal then asked if he was also George Smith. The man angrily said no. Neal then told him he was under arrest for the crime of bigamy. At this point, the man admitted he was George Joseph Smith. He was taken to the police station. The police now investigated Smith's past. They found another similar case from Herne Bay in 1912. They sent photographs of Smith to the police there. The Herne Bay police and the doctor, Frank French, identified Smith as Henry Williams, the husband of Bessie Mundy, who had drowned in her bath. This connected a third death to Smith. The bodies of Bessie Mundy and Margaret Lloyd were legally dug up for examination. The body of Alice Burnham was also examined. A famous pathologist named Bernard Spilsbury was asked to find out how the women died. He studied the bodies and the 3 bathtubs. He could find very few normal signs of drowning. He also found no evidence of poison or disease. He was puzzled. He measured the women's heights and the lengths of the tubs. He thought about the doctor's report from Herne Bay, which described Bessie Mundy lying straight-legged in the bath. Spilsbury formed a theory. He believed Smith had waited for the woman to be in the bath. He then would have quickly grabbed her feet and pulled them sharply upwards. This would make the woman's head and upper body slide underwater in an instant. The sudden rush of water into her nose and throat would cause immediate unconsciousness and very quick death. This would explain the lack of struggle and the minimal signs of drowning. To test this theory, Inspector Neal and Spilsbury did an experiment. They used a bathtub like the one from the crimes. They asked a female police officer, who was a strong swimmer, to get in the water. Inspector Neal, without warning, suddenly grabbed her feet and pulled them up. Her head went underwater instantly. She lost consciousness immediately and did not struggle. They had to revive her. This experiment proved Spilsbury's theory was correct. It showed how one strong person could murder another in a bathtub very easily and quietly. George Joseph Smith was formally charged with the murders of Bessie Mundy, Alice Burnham, and Margaret Lloyd. His trial began at the Old Bailey on June 22, 1915. In court, the prosecution showed the clear pattern of his actions. For each woman, he followed the same steps: marriage, a will, an insurance policy, a bath inspection, and then death. This pattern was called system evidence. Smith's lawyer argued this was unfair, but the judge allowed it. Smith chose not to speak in his own defense. The jury only took 20 minutes to decide he was guilty of murder. He was sentenced to death by hanging. Smith's lawyer appealed the verdict, saying the system evidence should not have been used. The appeal was rejected. On August 13, 1915, George Joseph Smith was hanged at Maidstone Prison. The use of the system of similar crimes to prove his guilt became an important legal precedent for future murder trials. His crimes were closed, and his surviving victims, the families of the deceased women, were left to rebuild their lives without the man who had betrayed them. The story of the brides in the bath ended with the execution of the killer. Story 9. Harm Drent was born in 1892 in a small farming town in the Netherlands. His family did not have much money. He was a quiet child who did not do well in school. He finished only a basic education. In 1910, when he was 18 years old, he decided to leave the Netherlands. He traveled by himself to the United States. He wanted to find new opportunities and a better life. He arrived in New York and then took a train to the middle of the country. He settled in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He was alone and had no family in America. He took any job he could find. He worked in factories and did manual labor. These jobs did not pay well. He moved from one small job to another. He did not make many friends. He lived a lonely life, often keeping to himself. In 1921, he got into trouble with the law. He was arrested in Barron County, Wisconsin, for burglary. This means he broke into a building to steal things. He used his real name, Harm Drent, at this time. He was sent to prison for this crime. He served time until 1922. After he was released from prison, he did not stay in Wisconsin. He moved around looking for work. By 1926, he had moved to West Virginia. He started using a new name, Harry F. Powers. He chose this name to separate himself from his past life and his criminal record. In West Virginia, he worked as a salesman. He sold things like brushes and household goods door to door. This job involved talking to people and gaining their trust. He was not successful enough to make much money. In 1927, he saw a newspaper advertisement placed by a woman named Luella Struther. She owned a small farm and a grocery store. She had placed what was called a Lonely Hearts ad. This was a way for people looking for marriage or companionship to meet someone through letters. Harry Powers wrote a letter to Luella Struther. They began to write to each other frequently. After some time, he traveled to meet her. Not long after they met, they got married. Through this marriage, Harry Powers gained a home on his wife's property and a stable life. His wife had her own business and property. After his marriage, Harry Powers continued to work as a salesman. But he also started to do something else in secret. He began to place his own Lonely Hearts advertisements in newspapers. He used a false name in these ads. He pretended to be a kind, successful businessman looking for a loving partner. He did this even though he was already married. Many women from different states answered his advertisements. He received many letters every day. He would write back to these women, building fake relationships through the mail. He built a garage on his wife's property. Under this garage, he built a basement room with several small spaces. He told his wife this was for storage. He was a private person and did not share his thoughts or plans with others. His wife was unaware of his secret letter-writing activities or the full purpose of the rooms he built. In the spring of 1931, Harry Powers, using the alias Cornelius O. Pearson, began writing letters to a woman named Asta Eicher. Asta was a widow living in Park Ridge, Illinois, with her 3 children, 15-year-old Greta, 12-year-old Harry, and 9-year-old Annabelle. She had placed her own advertisement seeking a companion. Powers' letters were kind and persuasive. He presented himself as a well-off businessman. After many letters, Asta Eicher trusted him. On June 23, 1931, Powers traveled from West Virginia to Illinois to visit Asta and her children. He spent a short time at their home. He then convinced Asta to take a trip with him alone, promising a better future. A friend of the family, Elizabeth Abernathy, agreed to care for the children at the Eicher home. Asta left with Powers. She believed they were going to prepare a new home for the children. A few days later, Elizabeth Abernathy received a letter. The letter was supposedly from Asta. It said that Cornelius Pearson would return to collect the children and their belongings to bring them to their mother. Soon after, Powers arrived at the Eicher house alone. He told the children to pack their clothes and toys. He also had them pack their mother's good dishes and other valuables. He was in a hurry. Before leaving, Powers gave young Harry Eicher a check to cash at the bank. The check was from Asta Eicher's account, but the signature was forged. The bank teller was suspicious because the signature looked wrong. The teller refused to give the boy the money. Harry returned to the house and told Powers. Powers became nervous. He quickly loaded the children and all the packed trunks into his car and drove away. He told a concerned neighbor they were all going on a long trip to Europe. Powers drove the children back to his property in Quiet Dell, West Virginia. His wife was away visiting family at this time. He took the children and their belongings to the garage and the hidden basement rooms he had built. During this time, he also went to the local post office to collect his mail. He was still receiving many letters from other women responding to his advertisements. Asta Eicher was already at his property. She had been there since their trip from Illinois. Shortly after returning with the children, Harry Powers killed Asta Eicher and her 3 children in the basement rooms. Evidence would later show that Asta and her 2 daughters were strangled. The boy, Harry, was killed by a blow to the head with a blunt object. Powers took any money Asta had with her. He then buried all 4 bodies in a long, shallow trench on a remote part of his property. He filled the ditch with soil. Soon after, Powers began writing to a new woman, Dorothy Pressler Lemke from Northborough, Massachusetts. She had also answered one of his newspaper ads. Using the same Cornelius Pearson name, he built another relationship through letters. He convinced her to travel to Iowa to marry him. In early August, she met him there. After they met, he persuaded her to withdraw all her savings from the bank, which was $4,000. This was a lot of money at that time. Dorothy Lemke then traveled with Powers back towards West Virginia. She believed they were going to start their married life in Iowa. She had shipped her personal trunks ahead. However, Powers had given the shipping company his real address in West Virginia, not an address in Iowa. This was a mistake. The trunks were sent to Cornelius O. Pearson in Fairmont, West Virginia, which was near Quiet Dell. Dorothy Lemke arrived at Powers' home. When his wife was away again, he took Dorothy to the same basement garage rooms. He strangled her and took her $4,000. He buried her body in the same trench with the Eicher family. During this time, neighbors in Quiet Dell noticed some unusual activities. They saw Powers digging on his land. They also saw him with different women at times when his wife was not home. But they did not think it was a serious matter. In Illinois, the Eicher family's friend, Elizabeth Abernathy, became very worried. She had not heard from Asta or the children for weeks. She contacted the police in Park Ridge and reported them missing. The police in Illinois began their investigation by following the only lead they had, the name Cornelius Pearson. They discovered that trunks belonging to Dorothy Lemke had been shipped by railway to that name in Fairmont, West Virginia. Officers traveled to West Virginia. They learned that the trunks had been delivered to a rural address in Quiet Dell, a place connected to a man named Harry Powers. When police went to Quiet Dell, they saw Powers himself actively clearing out the Eicher family's belongings from his garage. They placed him under arrest. A full search of Powers' property was conducted. In the basement rooms under the garage, officers found clear signs of violence. They discovered bloody clothing, locks of human hair, and a child's small, bloody footprint. They also found a partially burned bank book. The most important discovery came from a teenage boy who lived nearby. The boy told the sheriff that he had been paid by Powers a few weeks earlier to help dig a long, deep ditch on the edge of his property. The police went to that spot and saw the ground had been recently filled in. They began to dig. A short way down, they uncovered the bodies of Asta Eicher and her 3 children. A little deeper, they found the body of Dorothy Lemke. A leather belt was still tightly fastened around Dorothy Lemke's neck. Medical examiners performed autopsies on all 5 victims. The examiners confirmed that Asta Eicher, her daughters, and Dorothy Lemke had died by strangulation. The boy, Harry Eicher, had died from a severe skull fracture caused by a hammer or a similar tool. Police also searched Powers' car. They found a large bundle of letters from over 100 different women from across the country. These were responses to his Lonely Hearts advertisements. He had written back to many of them, using the same pattern of building false trust. It was clear he had planned to lure more victims. During his initial questioning at the county jail, Powers was injured. Officials claimed he fell down a staircase, but he had 2 black eyes and bruises. News of the crime spread quickly. The community was in shock. On September 20th, 1931, a large and angry crowd gathered outside the jail. They intended to take Powers from his cell and lynch him. The sheriff and his deputies used fire hoses and tear gas on the crowd to break it up. For his own safety, Powers was quickly moved out of the county jail. He was taken to the maximum security West Virginia State Penitentiary in Moundsville to await trial. The trial began later that year. So many people wanted to watch that it could not be held in a regular courtroom. It was moved to the local opera house. The prosecution presented physical evidence from the basement and the ditch. Witnesses testified, including the bank teller who rejected the forged check, the boy who helped dig the ditch, and neighbors who saw Powers with the victims. Postal workers confirmed the huge volume of his mail. Powers chose to testify in his own defense. He claimed he was innocent and that someone else must have committed the murders on his property. The jury did not believe him. On December 12, 1931, after a 5-day trial, the jury found Harry Powers guilty of the first-degree murder of Dorothy Lemke. The judge sentenced him to death by hanging. Powers' lawyers appealed the decision, but the appeal was denied. In the early morning of March 18, 1932, Harry Powers was led to the gallows inside the state penitentiary. He was executed by hanging. His body was buried in the prison cemetery. The victims' remains were returned to their families for proper burial. The crimes left a deep mark on the towns of Quiet Dell and Park Ridge. Powers' wife, Luella, was shocked and horrified by her husband's secret actions. She had known nothing about his crimes or his other identities. She divorced him after his arrest and tried to move on with her life. The case led to wider awareness of the dangers of Lonely Hearts schemes and prompted more careful police work on missing persons reports that crossed state lines. Harry Powers was finally brought to justice for the murders he committed in the hidden rooms beneath his garage.